Hey guys, I got another lesson for you. This time we're going to be talking about guitar basics. And I already put up a mandolin basics video. This is very similar. It's really important to get good technique at the beginning, right away when you start playing. If you develop bad habits, those habits are going to stick with you and they're going to be tough to break. And bad habits can be crippling to any guitar player. If you play with really bad form or technique, you could end up experiencing a lot of pain, getting tendonitis in your hand. And if you really want to become a great guitar picker, obviously speed is important. And if you have bad pick technique, bad right hand technique, then you're really going to have a difficult time playing at those high speeds that's just so cool to listen to in bluegrass music. So we're going to go through all the important elements of guitar basics. So first things first, with your guitar, I'll make a couple recommendations in terms of brand of guitar. My guitar is a Mossman guitar. It's a 76 Great Plains model, and Mossman actually doesn't make guitars anymore, but they were a good company back in the 70s, and their factory actually burned down, so you can't get Mossman guitars anymore. But Mossman is a very similar brand in terms of the way they make their guitars to Martin, and Martin, I think, is probably the best company in terms of making bluegrass guitars. I mean, their old D18s are really the cream of the crop. Of course, not everyone can get their hands on a good D18 Martin guitar, so other good brands. Collins makes great bluegrass guitars. Taylor actually makes some decent guitars in terms of their pickups. So if you want like an acoustic electric or something that you can play in like a country gig and you want a good built-in pickup, Taylor actually has some decent pickups in their guitars. Collins makes them too. So there are some brand recommendations. Gibson makes good guitars. I'm not a huge fan of Gibson bluegrass guitars. I'm more of a Martin man, but so there's that. Once you have your guitar, you need to put strings on it. I like to put on, there's a number of different brands. You can get Elixir, you can get, Martin has their own brand. I like D'Addario Phosphor Bronze. Okay, D'Addario Phosphor Bronze strings, and those are nice and bright. They're great for bluegrass picking. They last quite a long time. Not a long time, but a decent amount of time. And they break in pretty well, and they're just, to me, they're perfect for that bluegrass stuff. And you can also do other country things with it too, but you want, also for bluegrass guitar, you want to get on the heavier gauge side. Okay, if you're doing country or chicken picking, you want to get lighter gauge strings because you're using your fingernails to pick the strings. For bluegrass, you want a heavier gauge, and the reason that is because you're doing a lot of picking, and a heavier gauge string with a heavy pick pulls out a better tone. The heavier the gauge, the better the tone. The lighter the gauge, you sacrifice tone, but it's easier to play because the strings are more pliable. So that's better for chicken picking when you have to use your fingernails and your fingertips instead of a pick. Okay, so once you got your guitar and you got your strings on it, you might want a pickup. And that's because you're probably wondering what this thing is here. This is a Fishman pickup. I would not recommend a Surface pickup. I put this on when I was about 15 years old, and I just never got rid of it, but I haven't had a lot of reasons to get rid of it, or a lot of reasons to plug this guitar in. So this was just sitting there. I would get a pickup that you put an attachment at the end there. A lot of guitars have those built in, and there's a whole bunch of other pickups, so maybe I'll go through them in a different video. But if you're doing bluegrass, don't need to worry about it too much. But you might want to get one if you're doing like country gigs or something. Once you got your guitar with your strings and your pickup if you want one, now how do we hold the guitar? When I'm jamming, I like to put the guitar on my right leg with the bend in the guitar just sitting on my leg. Some pickers, they do it on their left leg, and some classical guitar players actually have the guitar at like a bit of an angle and playing like that. For bluegrass, I prefer it like this. Frankly, this is not the most important thing in the world. Just go with what's comfortable. And in terms of technique, right and wrongs, I don't want to pound anything into you too hard. The most important thing that I want to communicate to you is that You need to find your own way. Find out what's comfortable. There's no exact right way to hold a guitar or hold a pick. You know, if you vary it an inch or two here, it's not like all of a sudden you're not going to be able to play guitar. Some people feel very strongly about these things. I feel that technique is more principle based. How you hold a pick and how you hold a guitar is important in the sense that you want to make sure that you are flexible, that you're not tense or tight, you're not gripping anything too hard or overusing and overstimulating the muscles in an inappropriate way. Extreme tension is what causes problems, and you want your guitar technique to eliminate tension. So saying it has to be just like this on my right leg, that is tension free for me. Maybe you feel a little more comfortable over here, and that's okay too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the ways to hold the pick and to do pick strokes that I feel relieve tension the most. But as always, watch videos of great guitar players. Try and decide for yourself. When I'm showing you, I've watched a lot of the master guitar players. I've watched them closely and tried to figure out their pick techniques, and this is sort of what I've determined is most common among them. Most of the guitar players do some things similar. I mean, there's a lot of varying techniques. There's a lot of similarities as well. So let's look at the left hand very quickly. There's not a lot of things to talk about here. It's just that usually you want the neck of your guitar to be placed between the first knuckle joint of your first finger and the middle joint of your first finger. So this area right here gets placed right on the neck of the guitar, okay? Right about there. Then your thumb just sits on top, no big deal, nice and relaxed, okay? Now depending on the string you're playing on, or what fret you're playing on, you might want to rotate your hand a little bit and do different angles. For the most part, the neck of the guitar is going to be right there between your first knuckle and your middle joint of the first finger. If you're doing a lot of jazz chords that are difficult to reach, you might want to roll your hand underneath and your thumb will be now on the back of the neck. Jazz players, this is I think what's considered jazz position, they actually play like this very often. Classical players like this play like this all the time because then your fingers have maximum access to the fretboard. It is a little bit more awkward, and I think it's a little unnecessary for bluegrass to do that all the time. When you're playing up on the high frets, when you're doing awkward chord forms like that, you cannot reach that if you have your palm close to the back of the neck. So with these chord forms, you rotate your palm back, put your wrist down a little bit, and that gives you better access to all the frets, okay? So this is sort of your comfort zone, your home, with your palm lightly touching the back of the neck, your thumb just on top. But when you start doing some hard stuff, you also want to be able to rotate that way, okay? Now let's get into the right hand pick technique. This is what it's all about. Talk about this with a mandolin. The way you hold the pick on the guitar is very similar to the way I instructed you to hold it with the mandolin. Okay, now picks, I prefer to use a Wiegand pick. I like the large, the wide ones with not a very pointy edge. You can see it there in the other camera view. It's kind of a bit broader, not like the Dunlop guitar picks that are really common. Those are really crummy, I think. I like this. And you want to get a nice thick gauged pick. Okay, I like the Wiegand brand picks. I also like blue chip picks. But Wiegand is my favorite. That's what I go with. And you want to get a heavier gauge. When you're just starting out, it's okay to play with the lighter gauge picks because they're a little bit easier, and playing with a heavy gauge pick is tough for beginners because it's not flexible, it doesn't bend or anything. But pretty soon you want to be using a heavy gauge pick because the tone is much better and you cannot pick quickly with a thin pick. It's just absolutely impossible. So you want to go with a thick pick, especially for bluegrass picking. Jazz guys use a thinner, not a thinner, but a smaller, pointier pick. A jazz pick is a very specific type of pick. That's not what I use, but if you're playing jazz, you want to do some jazz lessons, I might whip that out for you. With bluegrass, I go with a Wiegand a heavy gauge pick. Okay? Once you got your pick, you want to put it on your first finger, and really the pick sits between your last first finger joint and the tip of your first finger. And you want the tip of the pick to be right next to the tip of your finger. Okay, you don't want the tip of the pick to actually be pointing away from you or away from the finger like some people do that. That is impossible. You want the tip of the pick to be just right next to the tip of your first finger. If you can see that. And your thumb just comes down on top of that, pat of the thumb right on top of the pick. Okay? If you can see the way I'm holding it, the whole hand there. Once you got that, now let's talk about the picking motion. As I mentioned in the mandolin video, you have three parts to your picking arm. Your forearm, your wrist, and your fingers. Your fingers are really just your thumb and your first finger. Okay, and they can do some finger motions, your wrist does some wrist motions, and your forearm does a lot of forearm motions. Especially with bluegrass guitar, and especially if you want to go fast, you need to make sure that you incorporate a lot of forearm. Okay, and that's really an unusual feeling for a lot of beginners. They want to go straight for the fingers. They plant their hand and their wrist on the strings or on the nut there of the guitar, and the only thing they're moving is the wrist and their fingers. This is one of the few times I'm going to tell you that something is bad. That is bad. You do not want to plant your hand on the nut and use only your fingers and your wrist. Okay? The only place that you want to be planting is up here on the top of the guitar. Your arm comes down, your forearm can be resting slightly on the top, but other than that, your wrist has got to be hovering above the strings. It is not going to be planted. It's got to be hovering. Okay? Now when you're practicing doing your pick motions, it's got to be led by your forearm. Forearm first. That's the engine. Okay? This is where that movement is happening. Your wrists and your fingers serve to make the movement more precise. They're not the muscle behind the pick movement, they're the precision. Okay? It's your forearm that's going to be doing all the work. And your wrist and your fingers are going to just boil that movement down to be a little more precise. So what I want you to do, the first thing I want you to do, just make some big swooping motions. And as you'll notice in the other camera view, your pick is going to be doing like a parabola, coming in and out. Okay? This is how it looks even at the small scale, because obviously you're not going to be picking only up and down. It's got to be a little in and out because your pick has to hit the string and then be free of it. So there's a little bit of that parabola motion. Okay? Now the trick is you want to boil that parabola motion to be as small as possible, so that when you're picking, you can go really, really fast with really, really small motions. And when you watch really fast pickers, it may look like they're using only their fingers or their wrists because it's such small movement. But if you look really, really closely, you'll notice that the movement is led first by the forearm. So I want you to focus on that. Do an up and down with the forearm. Now you want to incorporate your wrist by letting your wrist follow. And we're going to do a lot of cool picking with Tony Rice, Brian Sutton. We're going to do a lot of cool lessons. And so I'm glad I got to teach you some basics right at the beginning so that you can do all those complex picking patterns without pain and while staying as relaxed as possible. Alright guys, so until next time, I'm Fiddle and Mike. Go to fiddleandmike.com and sign up for a gold member subscription. That way you can get all the lessons, the full lessons, and you can get all the sheet music. There's a new one every single week. And you can access those lessons for as long as you're a member. So sign up today and become a gold member. See you next time.